Starting. Okay.
Excellent. Well, Bob, you made that trip very, very quick, and I'm so glad that it worked out and that you have connectivity at your at the Ecology Center. And for those of you who are who've just joined us and are puzzled by that comment, I will explain in a moment. We've had the start of the session because, as I said to a few of you about 20 minutes ago, we've had over the last 18 months that we've been doing webinars, we've faced quite a number of puzzling and last-minute technical challenges, but never have we had a big storm come in and knock the internet connectivity of our presenter just when we're doing the setup prior to a session. So, Bob, you've moved with great speed and I'm delighted that your Ecology Center did not lose power.
No, we're good for now.
So let me, without further ado, folks, let me give you a quick introduction to the. I see some of you I recognize some of your names. You've been with us before, and so you have a sense of it. So let me just be very brief. Over the next 30 minutes, Bob will deliver his presentation, and then he will take your questions for the next 30 minutes after that. But you don't have to wait until Bob's finished to ask questions either of me or of each other. You can see already that others have been making good use of the chat room in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's the box. Below that box, you can see the phrase main room and a horizontal blank box to the right. And if you type a question or a comment into that box and hit enter, it will appear in the chat room above for everyone to see. So if you have a comment, if you have technical difficulty, or you want to figure out a reference, I think as you have already heard, if you've been with us since for the last half hour, you'll know that I've already invited people to tell us where they're from and what experience they've had with community mapping, and we've already had several good replies. So, and I agree with Sheila. We're very appreciative, Bob, that you've gone the extra mile early to conduct this webinar. Before I introduce Bob, let me just say that so that's the chat box, and I invite you to use it. And if you're not familiar with Green Teacher, we have been publishing a nonprofit magazine for the last 20 years. And Bob, you need to advance that. And in the last 10 years, we've had the pleasure of publishing these 6 books. And if you're not familiar with our magazine, our nonprofit magazine, or our books, I would certainly encourage you to consider taking out a subscription afterwards. Will enable us to keep doing these free webinars. The other, as I mentioned, or as you heard moments ago, this presentation is being archived so that anybody can freely view it for the next month. After which it then disappears, like all our previous webinars, into a subscriber-only database. And if you are a subscriber and you're having trouble accessing any of those webinars, please just send us an email and we'll get things sorted out for you. So again, without further ado, I've already sort of half introduced him a couple of times. You now know, some of you know, that he is the director of the Litzinger Road Ecology Center. And Bob, have I pronounced that correct?
Yeah, Litzinger Road, yes. That works.
And that's a center is managed by the Missouri Botanic Garden. And as part of that work, he's gained more than a decade of experience using a variety of geospatial tools, including GIS, GPS, and handheld augmented reality games that engage teachers and kids with their local community. When I first met Bob, he was transitioning from being an award-winning elementary grade grade school math and science teacher. He's also written a technology column for another education magazine for many years. This is there are a few people in environmental and geographic circles as much and as diverse a background as Bob Coulter, and I'm just utterly delighted that that you agreed to do this webinar, Bob, and B, that we've managed to dodge the storm that's plaguing your part of Missouri this evening. A warm welcome to you.
Well, thank you. Glad that we're able to do this. I apologize in advance if I get a little frazzled with this. It was an unexpected shift, obviously. If I'm unclear on anything, please don't hesitate to use the chat box. I'm more than happy to clarify if I'm going astray or if I'm not meeting your needs. Anyways, as Tim said, in the next 25 to 30 minutes, I'd like to address this question of mapping your community and why map. As Tim said, I'm a former elementary teacher, spend my time with the Litzinger Road Ecology Center, where one of our signature elements is this idea of place-based education, attaching kids to their community, both affectively. I'm interested, I'm committed to my community, but also being able to understand key issues in my community and hopefully make a difference in the community. So that might involve building up native plant gardens, doing stream monitoring, stewardship to improve water quality and such. But ultimately, our goal is to hook kids into nature and more specifically the local community. You're seeing a picture there of Dylan, one of the kids that we've worked with, and it's that kind of intrigue. Nature is cool. I'm interested. I want to know more. That is one of our signature elements at the Ecology Center. But also, certainly most countries these days very concerned about curriculum goals. And as we go, you'll see a lot of opportunity to build math, science, and language skills. And I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to see the intros as you chimed in, but assuming a mix of both formal and informal educators, none of us as educators don't want to promote kids' abilities in math, science, and language, whether you're formally responsible or just for the good of the universe, building kids' capacity. You'll see a lot of that as we go through this. Given a fairly short time period, I'm going to try to focus our time together on a continuum of tools, if you will, from very low-tech, what can you get out of a static map, whether it's a paper map that these kids are looking at, or there's many online maps. We'll see one in a minute. Kind of, here's the map, here's the information, look at it and interpret it. No skills beyond basic web browsing involved. Then we'll go up a notch to web mapping. There's a lot of capacity now to do more formal mapping within the context of a web browser. A lot past just a simple Google map, where am I, where's my friend, how do I get directions to the bookstore kind of thing. A lot more power in web mapping, and I would venture to say in the next couple of years it'll become even more powerful. And then we'll wrap up the formal presentation portion by looking at formal desktop geographic information systems, or GIS. That's kind of the upper end of the tools that are available to us in mapping community environmental issues, but there's trade-offs in that. Depending on where you are and what your teaching situation is, the software may or may not be free, and there is a learning curve attached to high-end professional-grade software. So that's the continuum that I'm proposing, but as I said, please don't hesitate to use the chat box, and we can adjust as we go. Okay? And some of the issues we're going to look at, just so you get a range of things, we're going to look a little bit at community demographics. How do you describe your community, and make a link into the environmental issues that go with that. Also look at GPS coordinates. Many of us as environmental educators are out doing field work, and how can we not just record GPS points, yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't do much until you map them, but how can we position them on a map, get a sense of what's going on in our community? And then we'll end with some more full-blown mapping projects. What you're looking at on the screen there is an elevation map of the watershed that I happen to be sitting in right now. And you can see the borders in the dark blue, moving to light blue to yellow to red. We're often out with the kids up in the creeks and you see tributaries. Well, why are the tributaries there? Simple answer, because they're there, but that doesn't really help the kids to understand watersheds. And by working with the kids to both be in the stream, doing the field study, but also pulling out, looking at these maps of the community, they get a sense of what's going on there. You can see, for example, the two branches there in the bright red and how a higher elevation comes between them. And you can imagine a water drop hitting the peak there and having to fall to one side or the other toward the red. Again, the mapping just extends the kids' firsthand experience in the creek, getting a sense of how elevation helps to define the bounds of the watershed and even some of the features you see inside of it of the individual tributaries. Okay. Moving right along, static maps are really a great place to start. I don't mean to dismiss them because they're technologically fairly basic. There's a lot of potential there to support kids' learning. What you're seeing on your screen now is a tulip map from the Journey North project. It's one that I used for a couple of years with my students teaching third and fourth graders as far back as the late 90s, which gives you a sense of how long Journey North has been around. The gist of the project is that kids plant red emperor tulip bulbs all across North America and in some cases beyond, and then they report when they emerge and when they bloom. And it generates a pretty simple, here it is, map. But, excuse me, I gotta hit the storm alarm. Fortunately, my experience as a classroom teacher, I'm used to little events like that. Always be ready for whatever comes. Anyways, as I was saying, pretty simple, here's the data, but catch what my students were thinking, that they know that it's warmer in the south, colder in the north, and they were expecting that that data is just going to move straight up from south to north, and over the course of spring, you metaphorically watch the tulips migrate north. And you can see the data as of this cutoff date, January 31st, you don't get that pattern. You don't get a straight south to north. And this is one that you wouldn't get if you didn't map the data. And by looking at the map of the data, you can see a very definite coastal influence where the tulips are emerging, really going all the way up to, looks like about the New York City area in the east and up in the Puget Sound area off in the west there. Quite a shift for my kids, quite a surprise for them to see, no, it's not just a sort of a south to north progression, but in fact, there's other factors going on there. And that inevitably led us to look at climate maps. What is driving that? Why is it warmer on the coasts than it is in the central part of North America? So again, a lot of mileage out of some pretty basic static maps. So enough for that. If anybody has immediate questions on that, feel free to jump in on the chat room. Otherwise, we'll move into some slightly more advanced projects. As I said, we're going to try to go live. Let's try this one, Tim. And I'm going to, let's see, begin sharing. And this may not be coming up on your screen. What I'm trying to do is go over to a live web browser to show you the maps we're going to move to. or not, as the case may be. Okay, at this point you should be seeing my browser with a map of St. Louis. Tim, can you chime in if that's not coming up?
It looks great, Bob.
Okay, and so what I'm using is a program called ArcGIS Online. It's produced by Esri, Environmental Systems Research Institute, which is a leader in geographic information system mapping. What I'm looking at right there is a map that I chose to put up there of population density. And you can get a sense here of how St. Louis City and County, the two that are in more orange, are more dense than the suburbs, which are more dense than going out into the more rural areas. And that's fine, but what's the environmental issue here? One big issue is density. What's the environmental impact of urban areas versus rural areas? And I've seen well-articulated arguments going both ways, that urban areas are crowded, congested, you get a lot of exhaust, a lot of pollution, that's a problem. But there's also good arguments to be made for the benefits of people living in a dense urban area and condensing all of that so that you don't get the long distance commutes, you don't get the suburban sprawl where you get a lot of asphalt paving, a lot of runoff, things like that. So again, pretty simple map that kicks in some environmental issues. If you zoom in on the map, you'll see that it dynamically adjusts to show you more detailed areas. So as I zoom in, you'll see particular pockets of St. Louis that are more densely packed or less densely packed. Again, it's a springboard to some environmental discussions just by itself. But continuing the thread, I want to go further. Imagine that I'm out testing the water quality and I want to pinpoint these locations on a creek. Where am I? And it's pretty routine these days in environmental studies to use a simple handheld GPS, pinpoint your location. Well, imagine if I could get those on a map right away. And lo and behold, computer gods willing, I can do that. What I'm going to do is drag a table over that has the GPS points for my hypothetical testing. And you can see that they pretty quickly map them. I'm going to have to pull back a little bit so that a map will come in here. And you can see my 3 testing locations along the creek. Gives it a lot more context here and lets you see what's happening. I'm going to try to adjust this. Right now, what you're not seeing is a lot of the contours. A topo map would be much more appropriate for an environmental study like this. So I can change my base map here. I'm going to change it over to a topo map. And again, lo and behold, a couple of quick clicks and suddenly I'm in the middle of my watershed. I can take a look at the issues here. I'm not quite sure how clear it's coming through on the screen, but you can see the contour lines that I'm very definitely testing along the creek here at the lowest points in the elevation. Oops, that's an interesting echo. But pretty simple. This is all in a standard web browser. I didn't have to install any extra software. The table itself, let's see if that shows up. I'm going to try to open that for you. And Microsoft just loves to throw some updates at us. But you can see it's a pretty simple, here's my latitude, here's my longitude, and some basic data there. Low-key uses, these are probably tools that you're familiar with, and you can add this to enhance your environmental project. If I go look at a particular area, I know exactly where it is. I know what the pH is. I made up the pH while creating this dummy data for tonight. But imagine the difference here between, yeah, we went out and tested water versus, yeah, I went out, tested it, and now I know exactly where it is, where some of the environmental issues are, where different factors change. All within a web browser and a simple Excel table. Nothing too special, nothing too hard about it. I'm going to minimize this, and let's see. I'm seeing some questions here about the program. Everything I've used here so far is totally free. That's just a simple browser. If you go to arcgis.com, you can set up a totally free personal account for yourself. It's there, ready to go. And as you saw, to plot my points, all I had to do was drag the table literally onto the browser surface, and it's good. Okay? So, and that's good so far. I want to take it one step further, though. If my students are really into investigating water quality in the watershed, I'm going to want to go past just, here's my points, this is where my data is. And again, from the beginning, I'm trying to ratchet up what's the sophistication of the tools for mapping your community versus the trade-offs of what you'd need in terms of your own learning curve and the student's sophistication. So we're going to change over now to a formal ArcGIS program. This is commercial grade professional software. Environmental professionals use it, city managers use it, planners use it. Increasingly, school districts are using it, looking at demographics. If you're in an expanding area, where do we do the zoning to be sure that the right number of kids get to the right number of schools so we don't overcrowd one school, underload another school? Some are using these tools for bus routing. How do I set up my bus run so that I pick up the right number of kids and minimize the gas expenditure or not have too many buses out on the road? Very, very powerful tools, but still accessible to students. The basic metaphor here that I like to use is those of us that have been teaching long enough remember the old overhead transparencies, and your mapping area is really just a set of transparencies in a sense that I can turn on different layers. So here I'm turning on Deer Creek, and it feeds into River Des Peres, and then that will flow out to the Mississippi River. Okay, Bob, that's fine, but that's a lot of overhead for a lot of psychic and mental overhead for just making a basic map. What I can do, though, is put on a lot more layers than I can in an online location, or like the ArcGIS Online. Here I'm mapping 4 test locations. Excuse me again, the storm alarm. And back. The National Weather Service is doing their part to be sure I stay safe tonight. Anyways, what we're looking at here are 4 actual test locations. This was a project that I did with 5th graders. They were testing the water quality at 4 different locations, 4 different times during the winter and early spring, and running their data through a formula the National Sanitation Foundation developed to assess the water quality. 0 is awful, 100 is great. In an urban/suburban creek, you're not going to get perfect water. That's just life. But you can see from this one, the 60.94, that's the furthest one upstream where I'm sitting right now, going downstream. Second site's pretty much the same. Third site, you get quite a drop-off in water quality there. And it raises good questions. What's going on there? What might be causing the water quality? And so the students added another layer that we created, this TMDA site, Total Maximum Discharge Allowance. It's a program that the state of Missouri manages that allows you to pollute up to a certain level. Fascinating discussion to have. Is this a good idea to allow people to pollute? Counter argument is if you don't allow some pollution, you're not going to have any business. And if you don't regulate it, you're going to get a lot of midnight dumping. So in any event, notice that there's 8 within the watershed, 4 known discharge sites between where it's relatively good and relatively bad. What might be causing that? And now I can go in and take a look. Let me see if I can do that without creating a mess here. I'm going to try to select those 4 locations. Oh, too much selected there. Oh, that'll be okay. Ignore the fact that I grabbed the creek there, if you don't mind. What I want to look at is those discharge sites, and notice they're selected, and I can have the software focus just on those. And 2 of those, the first and the third, are limestone operations. And if you remember your high school or college chemistry, kicking up a bunch of limestone will throw the pH off and make it go higher, since limestone is a base. Let's see what happens to the pH there. I'm going to change how this is showing the data. Right now it's showing the overall water quality, but I'm going to change it right now to show the pH level. Again, remember there were 2 known sites kicking up a lot of limestone in here. Notice that your pH has gone up, probably due in large part to kicking up that limestone. You get a lot of higher pH material washing into the creek. So that's one possible explanation. Another possible explanation would be looking at the land use. And you can see from the legend on the left here that gray is industrial, red is commercial, and you've got a really dense network along the creek here of the industrial commercial zone. Again, you might be kicking in some pollution there that throws off the water quality. All of these are things that are theoretically possible with the ArcGIS Online environment, but at least right now, you're not going to get complex data like this land use to flow through your browser very well. The test locations, the discharge sites you could put in, you saw me do that earlier, but even that, it doesn't lend itself to a quick redo of going from the average water quality over to the pH. Just trying to share with you tonight some of the trade-offs, again, moving up the power scale, and you get a lot more control over your data. One last possibility in here is very prosaic. Let's look at the road network if it's there. Don't quite have the roads there. See if I can add them quickly. And notice how easy it is to put in new data. I could say, yeah, I meant to do that, but no, reality, the roads weren't there for you. Notice that as you move downstream, you're getting into a much denser road network here. And think about this, it's in the winter. St. Louis does get a fair amount of winter weather, and so you've got road salt running off, sanding for the roads, and then a storm, rain or a slush comes through, washes into the creek, and that might affect your water quality. So instead of looking just at the pH level, let's look at the level of solids in the water. And so I'm going to change it over to reflect the solids in the water. And again, you can see relatively the same for the first 2, but then you get in here and you've got a much higher level due, we believe, to the road salt washing in and just sand and other things washing in. Bottom line for this, very powerful software, a bit of a learning curve, but there are some nice resources available that can teach you the GIS and for a fairly low cost, in some cases even free. So good potential there. Okay, let's go back and just a quick recap of these. We saw the static map. I have to turn off sharing, I believe. There we go. And so a quick recap, basic things like population density and other demographic variables, anything else you can put up on a map, really supports some good environmental discussion, looking at what's in my community, how does my community compare to other places, projects like that. you can pretty quickly throw in some test locations, put it on a topo map, or you can move up to full-blown desktop GIS. Each time you're making a trade-off, increased sophistication versus the power that you gain. Other projects that we've done with students with a full-blown GIS, St. Louis is part of what some people call Tornado Alley, and I was working with some middle school students, and their neighborhood, two different schools actually, their neighborhood got hit with tornadoes, and we were able to get data within a week of those tornado strikes, plot them by latitude, longitude, by their force, and the kids got to see the map representation of what they could see in their community. Again, just adding dimensions to the study past direct firsthand experience and miles past what you get by reading about water, about tornadoes, or about any other environmental issue. As I said at the beginning, connecting kids to their community, helping them understand the issues, make a difference, and really be invested in their community is such a big part of what we do as environmental educators. And I really think mapping your community is a big part of that. Okay. I believe at this point we move on to places where you can pose questions to me. We'll look back to my email address in a bit if you want to follow up afterwards. But Tim, I believe this is where people submit their questions.
That's right. Thank you, Bob.
Okay.
That was great. And I'm so glad that the alarms that were ringing in your center were ones that you could easily turn off and didn't cause you to disappear on us. That was great. So yes, everybody, this is an opportunity to do as Bob just suggested. See the slide there, the blank box at the top, and feel free to type in a question and then press the submit button. That will send it to a back room that I'll go retrieve it at, and you can, if you have a second question, you can then type that question in as well. So, and while you're doing that, let me say, Bob, just apropos to the question that someone asked earlier about that Bob already responded to about the whether the ARC, I think it was ArcGIS, was it free? I think was the question, Bob, that you already responded to.
Yeah, the online is free, and there are ways to get the licensed desktop software, school site license, for as little as $50. Happy that we can include that in the follow-up email, or people can drop me a note.
That sounds great. And I was just about to say that, Bob. We will be sending out an email to everybody who registered for the webinar, including the many who are looking forward to viewing the archive over the next week or two. But we will include in that email any references. We'll also include your email address so that people have those. And apropos to the questions that we field in the next few minutes, we can decide what else we want to add to that follow-up email as well. Hi, Bob. I don't know if you can see the questions that I've pushed up onto the screen. I'm actually having a few technical difficulties of my own at the moment, so I've gone.
I'm still seeing the. Do you have a question?
Okay, well that's fine. Let me. It's probably just a preview I can see. So the first question, Bob, is: would you recommend any of the Esri online tutorials or classes? And probably again, you'd let us know what ESRI stands for when you answer that question.
Sure. ESRI used to be an acronym for Environmental Systems Research Institute. I believe they've rebranded themselves as just straight ESRI, kind of like other organizations have done over the years. And they do have a number of online and classroom style classes that you can take. They have a virtual campus where you can do classes for, I believe it's about $100 for 6 classes. I think there's an educational discount attached to those, so you can do it for a bit less. Their classroom formal training things tend to be a bit pricey. They're aimed more at the corporate market. I have to say that I haven't done them. Your best bet for getting started is probably the resources that we'll be able to send you in the follow-up. What you can get for about $50 is a book with lesson plans in it. They're not going to be terribly localized because they're books that are marketed nationally and globally. But doing those tutorials would let you get a sense of how to do GIS. We can also include a link in the follow-up email. We have a totally free PDF book on mapping your community. Once you get the hang of basic GIS, how do you go online, find the data, do that local mapping? And that, again, that's a totally free PDF download. And most important, though, in that $50 tutorial is a 1-year site license for the software that it's a pretty easy path to convert to a permanent license. So yeah, the long way of saying, yeah, there are the online classes which are manageable cost-wise. Their classroom classes tend to be a bit pricey for an educational budget. But really, I would start with those tutorial documents because they're so cost-effective and you can use them directly with your students.
Thanks, Bob. I've got a 2-part question here. I guess I'll break it up a little bit. Could you maybe talk a little bit about where people can get data sources?
Sure. If somebody can chime in a little bit more, whoever posed that question, what type of data you're looking at. A lot of, if we can mentally think back to the watershed project that I was showing, the creek networks, things like that are available both online. If you do a Google search for what's called tiger data, and we'll be sure to include that. That would give you basics like a creek network, the GPS points. It's just a simple table that you would import, like what you saw me do with the online version. But your better sources are probably to tap your local county planning office or whatever the equivalent is. For example, the watershed boundaries, a more detailed creek network, all those things I was able to get from the St. Louis County Planning Office. A couple of caveats in that, though. Outside the U.S., your mileage may vary on that. Different countries have different operating metaphors for government data. So, for example, the CD worth of data that I got from St. Louis County Planning was only $15. Other places will try to embed the cost of developing the data in their sale of the data products, if you will. So again, those of you outside the U.S., your mileage may vary a bit. Other places to look at, whatever your state or province equivalent of a Department of Conservation, Department of Natural Resources. A lot of places have data clearinghouses too. For example, in Missouri, there's MISDIS, the Missouri Spatial Data Information Service, where you can pull up all kinds of data. Again, your mileage would vary, and those are some places to start. If you drop me an email, I can either suggest places, or I may know somebody in your area that I could ping you to that would be a good local resource. Again, mileage may vary on that.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
And the corollary question. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just noticing Mike's comment. Yeah, some states do have statewide adoption. Missouri just signed a contract for statewide ESRI GIS tools. And the basic deal there is that any school, after school, homeschool setup can get free GIS software with a fairly low hurdle. I believe the way it's written is that the school has to invest in the time for teacher professional development, but it's a pretty low hurdle to get there. And I don't know the exact count, but Mike's absolutely right that more and more states are creating these statewide adoption arrangements.
Great. There's one more question, and I'm going to ask actually people to put their questions in the chat box because I'm having some technical difficulty accessing this remote site where the questions normally go. But the question that the follow-up question, the part 2 of the question was, can you comment about the accuracy of the handheld GPS units and how they match up with GIS data?
Well, let's say I wouldn't want to land a plane with that level of accuracy. Good enough to get you in the ballpark. Just in general, GPS has a built-in error factor depending on where you read, anywhere from 5 to 20 feet. It'll vary a bit with atmospheric conditions and the angle of the satellites that particular day. It's pretty good, it's just not precision quality. So you've got that source of error, and you've also got levels of error in your data, and that's where, rather in your maps that you're putting the data on. And that's where you're probably better off getting as local a set of maps as you can. That's where going to your county planning office, putting the data right on a topo map, that kind of a thing will get the data a lot closer than if, let's say, that I was zoomed back out looking at all of Missouri, try to drop the latitude, longitude on there. Statewide, nationwide, global data, it's just a little bit coarser because whoever developed the data is assuming that you're not doing that highly localized work. But with all of that said, just off-the-shelf GPS and basic maps, they're certainly good enough for a middle school, even high school environmental study. This is not an environmental compliance thing that's going to end up in court, that kind of stuff. The educational benefits of quick and dirty, simple data far outstrip, in my mind, the benefit of getting it down to centimeter accuracy. There's certainly tools that can do that for you, but that's an enormous learning overhead. The equipment is expensive as well, but there are high schools that are really focused on building technology skills, and they might focus on that. So that's what it is.
Great. Okay. And do you, in your presentation, you described, you did that wonderful overlay of maps associated with the watershed around your nature center and the kind of questions that various kinds of data would could potentially lead students to ask and be good research and inquiry questions. And earlier you took out the Journey North maps and the kinds of questions that the data lend themselves or lead towards. Are there other examples of maps that, obviously we had a limited time this evening in terms of the presentation, but given unlimited time, were there other kinds of maps that you would have liked to have included that would give people a sense of, the greater breadth of mapping possibilities?
Sure. These I picked because it's a fairly quick and dirty way to get right down in your community. As I said, we had that both natural disaster, but an educationally serendipitous tornado that really hooked the kids, got them interested in tornadoes. both the specific paths of those tornadoes, but pull back to look at a broader time and is our area more or less susceptible to tornadoes? And to looking at data for the last 50 years, that kind of research looks good. We in St. Louis, we're just a bit north of the New Madrid Falls. Earthquakes are not an everyday concern like if we were in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's there as an issue, and mapping earthquakes is another common project that you could do. Mapping climate patterns. We've done some work with looking at species and where do you find certain species? What's the climate that goes with that? Several years ago, when it was the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition, people not in the U.S., Lewis and Clark did basically on foot and boat trip from St. Louis all the way out to the West Coast, exploring the West. A few years ago was the 200th anniversary of that, and so we had some funding from the Park Service, and what we did was map exactly where Lewis and Clark found individual species. Every mention of a species in their journal, this multi-volume set, and we got some really fascinating results in there. For example, picture on the West Coast, you get these big redwood trees, and as soon as the precipitation drops off, they did not see those trees again for quite a while. So different areas lend themselves to different projects, but really across the earth and environmental sciences, if it has a place to it, you can probably map it. The one limitation that we found in that is mapping current weather is difficult, just because of access to the data. For example, if what I just encountered an hour ago were happening during the school day, I couldn't map it in a GIS readily. It's just a function that the companies that track that sort of thing, that's their business. They sell that data, and in my experience, they haven't been all that inclined to make it available in a readily usable format in a GIS, and it's also live. So we'd be looking at it through a web browser just like everybody else, for better or worse. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. No, that's great. That gives us a much broader overview. I don't have any more. I don't see any more questions. I did
Mike has
actually.
One down here. Yeah, Mike has one down in the chat area. He was asking
I can't see it. Go.
Mike is asking how I got the data points so close to the stream. Luck, basically. Some days it's good, and some days it's not so good. Again, some of it is just the alignment of the GPS satellites. Sometimes it's harder. Times when you're pinpointing the location and you got a lot of tree canopy, it gets more difficult. The data where I was showing you the fifth graders, we didn't start until mid-November, and they didn't have much tree canopy blocking the access to the satellite signals. You'll just get a better read without that interference of all the leaves. Tim had said earlier that we'd done some work with handheld augmented reality games, and one of the games we developed, you're relying on GPS in the woods, and you can imagine that's sending the kids all over the place, unfortunately, just because with the tree canopy, it just blocks the signals quite a bit. And Mike had another question there about the GPS data from smartphones. That's past my expertise. It may come down, again, all the variation just goes with GPS. That might be an issue of the chips that are in a given unit, if they're any better or worse. But that's somewhat past my technical expertise to sort out individual chipsets and such. Somebody like Garmin, their tech support might be able to answer those questions, although government, of course, will say that their units are best because they want you to buy the units. Generally, positioning on smartphones, though, you got to be a little bit careful what you're really getting there. Is it true GPS? Is it positioning off of cell towers? Sometimes you're positioning off of a network of Wi-Fi signals. And I don't think any of those are going to be as good as GPS signals. But again, an electrical engineer may contradict me on that.
Great. I'm still having trouble actually seeing. I've got other technical difficulties sorted out, Bob, but I can't see the chat room. So if
Well,
I
that's
can't
interesting.
yeah, that's unusual too. So if there's any other questions there, feel free to answer them. I don't have any others in the back.
I'm seeing, or since we ended the share, we had Mike's questions, we did that. I believe we addressed the access to the GIS software. Kathy had asked about a certificate of attendance. Tim, that's really your department.
And yes, I responded to say that anyone who sends an email to me, to tim@beanteacher.com, I'm more than happy to make up a certificate for them.
Okay. We just got a question about what sort of data would you request. This becomes kind of a chicken and egg or cart before, or really more of a cart before the horse kind of question. I would start with the questions that you want to investigate. If your goal is to teach GIS, then yeah, it doesn't really matter. Let's get some fun data and explore it. But if you've got a particular issue, I want to investigate water quality, for example, then you directly or you with the students could brainstorm, what kind of data do we need here? Well, we're going to need the creek network. We might want to have the land use. We might want to have any known pollution sources. If there's any EPA Superfund sites, whatever is relevant there. I'd really encourage you to start with the questions that you want to investigate and then brainstorm what kind of data do we need. Your mileage will vary what you can get from a planning office, but if you're in a reasonably large metropolitan area, they probably have somebody doing GIS and they can help you with that data quest. If you're out in a deep rural area, that might be problematic. That if you're in a rural area where they may not have the infrastructure built up yet to have a full-blown GIS office, you might have to rely on whatever your state data clearinghouse is, or if you're outside the U.S., whatever the equivalent is. But again, at the risk of being a broken record, your mileage will vary. Missouri has a really good spatial data information service, fairly deep, fairly detailed. Right across the river in Illinois, unless it's changed in the last couple of months, it's fairly thin as far as what's available. So it just does vary quite a bit. Another resource you might want to think about, though, is if you have a local university with a strong geography department or anybody doing GIS there, they might have data for you as well. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. That's great, and I think we don't have any more questions here, but we'll let people add more to the chat room. I think what I'd like to do now, especially because we're kind of beyond the time people were expecting to leave, is to do something that I failed to mention at the outset, which is to encourage people to fill out a very short survey, and as an act of pure bribery, or as an incentive would be a better word, I will ask you, we'll be offering one or two free digital one-year subscriptions to Green Teacher to those that fill out the survey, and I'll just bring that up on the screen here. And you'll see if you scroll down, everyone, that there's essentially 5 questions, but only 3 of them are multiple choice, and you can see that I still haven't corrected in question number 1 the typo in that last choice. It's still terrible instead of terrible, but I think that's unlikely to be your choice for this session, so that's irrelevant. But in any case, if you would be so kind as to fill out the survey, and you'll see a submit button at the bottom, those answers would be very, very helpful to us. And if you do have additional comments or questions, please type those in the box, and in a moment or two, we'll come back and take up any questions that you do have. And Bob, while they're doing that, let me say I'm so delighted that it sounds like that the lack of alarms in the background suggests the storm is passing.
Yeah, it looks like we're pretty good. Let's see, I'm not sharing, so I'm gonna take a peek at the local weather map. But right before we were starting, it was pretty intense.
That might have been a good...
Yeah, we get a little break. It's coming. We've got another one coming behind it. So it looks like it's going to be a fun and festive night.
It probably would have been a good idea. Obviously, it would have been a little it's not, as you demonstrated the other day when we were doing our practice session. It's there's a few challenges in trying to present, share your screen, and bring these maps up into the WIMBA classroom for all to see. But I would have been tempted to ask you to share that storm map that you were just looking at moments ago, and had looked at early, referred to earlier.
Yeah, if people want to, I don't know if I'm still alive here. Oh, and
you sound like you are. We'll give people another minute to fill out the survey, okay. And by the way, Kathy Courier has already asked a question that will that you may want to respond to in a few moments.
Sure. Certainly, Journey North, the letter J and then north.org is really a very reliable go-to for a wide range of projects. A new one of that ilk that's coming around is something called Budburst. If you Google Project Budburst, same basic idea, reporting local environmental phenomena. They don't yet have the density of schools, so you get the depth that you saw in that Journey North map of just so many places reporting data. You get nice patterns there. Explore the ArcGIS online. There's some free tutorials that you can play with there just to get used to using the ArcGIS online environment. There's both, I believe, a half-hour one and a 3-hour webinar that you can do that would just get your feet wet with it. Very powerful relative to what was available even a couple of years ago. And I think that in the next couple of years, it's going to keep moving in that direction. And the really nice part about that is you don't have to install any software. And those of you that work in school know how hard it is to get administrative clearance for installing new software.
Bob, let's go back to Journey North. In the example that you showed, it was related to the emergence of tulips, and you could see them.
You spoke too soon, Tim.
I sure did, that's for sure. My question was about Journey North, and you referred to the tulip side of their mapping projects, but they have other ones. Can you tell us about some of their other signature projects that schools in Canada and the U.S. can join in?
Yeah, sure. For example, just scrolling back here, somebody, somebody, I believe that earlier, it might have scrolled off the end. Somebody else who's in on the webinar was using it for monarch butterflies, both in the fall reporting the last monarch that you see moving southward, and in the spring, when do you see your first monarch of the spring? Really great migration study there for the environmental factors, but also just, anthropomorphizing really heroic voyages that monarchs take to do that level of migration over several generations. Great scientific mysteries, how monarchs that were never there, because again, it's multiple generations, individual monarchs who were never there can find their way back into the northern U.S. and into Canada that really their grandparents or great-grandparents left earlier. Good stuff there. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of their tracking eagles. That may be a slightly local interest because we do have eagles that go up and down the Mississippi River here, but Journey North has been working for years with eagles on the East Coast, and it's just a great tracking project to plot the latitude, longitude of the eagles as they move up and down seasonally. As a technological advance, those batteries now can last a couple of years, strapped on the back of an individual eagle. So imagine you could track that same eagle, not general eagles as a species. So where does that specific eagle go for a couple of years? Do they follow exactly the same pattern? Do they not? Do they travel at different time frames if the climate is different? Really nice possibilities there. The Mystery Class project, you get clues trying to pinpoint 10 different locations based on geographic clues, a lot of which depends on you making contrast with how's that place different than my place. Going back to the theme of our webinar tonight, by knowing your location and how it's different from these clues, that helps you to nail down where are these Mystery Class sites. And then at the end of the project, you can submit your guesses for where those 10 sites are and see how close you came and compete with other schools. And poke around on jnorth.org, a lot of good stuff there, and happy to follow up with any of the participants to sort out some of the opportunities there.
Great. Well, thanks, Bob. And I think it's probably time to wrap this up. This has really been a wonderful, in spite of our technical and geographic challenges and weather challenges. This has been a wonderful session, and the comments that are pouring in suggest just exactly that. I really think.
Yeah, and just a quick shout to Jennifer. Yes, history changes, the industrial locations, absolutely. Why are they there? Why did the early industrial locations go there? Change from water power to steam power, coal power. A lot of good stuff there, Jennifer. Good.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for answering that question too. And as someone Beyond the Room ID says, safe journey home. But thank you so much for doing this webinar for us, Bob. We really appreciate it. And
glad to do it.
And as Sheila said earlier on, you're the first presenter who's had to go literally an extra mile to help make this happen, and we're all very appreciative.
Glad to do it. I'm glad we were able to fit it in.
Me too. So I guess what I'll do, or perhaps I'll ask you as the last thing to do here, is to go up and hit the archive.
Okay.